free and open source software, or FOSS. We talk about it all the time. But it really is the foundation, the actual operating system of our whole digital world.
It really is. Think about it. Databases, compilers, all those crucial encryption libraries, the web frameworks that run everything.
Right. I mean, almost every modern business is built on components that are released under FOSS licenses. But here's the paradox, and it's a huge one. So much of this critical software, the stuff that billions of dollars in commerce rely on every single day, is maintained by just a handful of people.
Sometimes just one person, a single developer or a very small team of volunteers.
And the giant corporations that are making massive, often just unbelievable profits from using this FOSS, they provide almost nothing back.
Almost no compensation, no real support to the developers who are actually maintaining it. And the result is, well, it's predictable. It's structural failure.
Developers just leave. They get burned out, they walk away from FOSS development, projects get abandoned, and the whole ecosystem gets more and more fragile.
It's like building a skyscraper on a foundation of, I don't know, sheer goodwill.
Exactly. And you might be listening to this and thinking, hang on, isn't that the whole point? It's free software. Why should users have to pay? And, that question gets right to the heart of the crisis.
It does. To really get the economics here, the creators of the guidelines we're looking at in this deep dive use a really great analogy.
The street performer.
The street performer. FOSS developers are basically the street performers of the digital world.
Okay, let's unpack that. So a performer plays music in a public square. Everyone walking by gets to enjoy it. The music is a public good.
Right. It's non-excludable. You can't really stop people from hearing it. And it's non-rivalrous, which just means me listening doesn't stop you from listening.
But the key part is that paying is completely 100% voluntary.
So what happens?
Well, what always happens? Most of the crowd enjoys the music. Maybe they stop for a minute, say, hey, great job, and then they just walk away without putting a single coin in the hat.
And that's the classic free riding problem. It's why, economically speaking, the whole system is so vulnerable to collapse.
We see that laid out really clearly in the materials for this deep dive. This free riding, it's not a surprise. It's a totally predictable outcome of how FOSS is set up right now.
The benefit is free, and the cost gets pushed onto the volunteer.
Now, here's where we need to make a really critical distinction. If you're just quietly listening to the street performer, enjoying the music, that's fine.
That's within the spirit of it, the freedom of use.
Exactly. But what if you walk up to them and say, hey, can you play that really complicated 5-minute classical piece next? And make sure you play it perfectly.
Ah, now you've crossed a line.
Yeah.
That's the jump from being a passive listener to making an active demand.
If you're requesting a specific song, or in the FOSS world, specific feature, a bug fix, an urgent security patch, you're demanding that the performer use their real, finite time and energy just for you.
And if you make that request without offering any payment, that's what the No Free Lunch Project calls unpaid requesting.
And when a corporation builds its entire multi-million-dollar business model on the idea that they can get unlimited professional-grade maintenance and security services just by making unpaid requests, well, that model is broken from the start.
It's just fundamentally unsustainable and unethical, really.
The problem seems to come from this, basic misunderstanding about what software resources even are.
Yes, there's this optical illusion. Because code costs nothing to copy, people think the resource is infinite.
Right. It's non-rivalrous, so it feels limitless. But there is a huge catastrophic difference between the code itself and the maintenance of that code.
That's the whole point. Code can be copied infinitely. Maintenance cannot be copied.
Maintenance uses up the one resource that is absolutely finite.
Human time.
Human time for debugging, for testing, for security updates, for handling compliance, and it also costs money. Real money for servers, for hardware to run tests on.
So these corporations think they're just drawing from an infinite digital well, but what they're actually doing is mining the maintainer's personal time and money. They're extracting a scarce resource and paying nothing for it.
And this brings us to what might be the biggest expectation gap in modern tech. The user companies, often these huge industry giants, they expect professional-grade service, the kind of service they'd get from a vendor they pay millions to.
They want immediate bug fixes. They demand 247 security responses. They want expert answers to their very specific technical questions.
Year after year without paying a single cent.
And so the rational question for the maintainer becomes impossible to ignore. Why should I sacrifice my free time, my own money, my energy time I could be spending with my family or on my actual paying job to provide free, professional service to a company that has made a conscious decision to pay me nothing?
And if the answer to that is they shouldn't, then we've just defined the problem. So our mission in this deep dive is to analyze this whole crisis and explore the really ingenious defense mechanism that these no free lunch guidelines propose, a way to shift funding from being optional charity to being core business risk management.
Okay, so let's dig deeper into that structural flaw. We've established that FOSS acts like a public good. Can you expand on what that means and why it makes the whole system so fragile?
Absolutely. The Code of Conduct TID on MD file in the project lays it out very clearly. A public good has two key features. It's non-excludable and non-rivalrous.
Okay, so non-exportable means once the software's out there, you can't stop anyone from using it, even if they don't pay.
Correct. And non-rivalrous means that if one company, say, downloads and uses a critical library like OpenSSL, that doesn't stop another company from using the exact same code.
So that's amazing for getting people to adopt it, but it sounds like a disaster for getting people to fund it. That's the trap. It's a perfect recipe for massive, consequence-free free riding. A free rider is just someone who enjoys the benefit without paying the cost.
And the Code of Conduct T.MD warns that the consequence here is pretty stark. If the big users don't contribute to maintenance, then maintenance eventually has to stop.
And the whole ecosystem becomes unsustainable. The very thing that made FOSS so popular, the free access, is the same thing that leads to projects being abandoned.
This brings us to a term we hear all the time in tech, developer burnout. But the materials we're looking at today argue that calling it burnout is actually a dangerous mischaracterization.
It's a really critical reframing. We have to stop looking at burnout as some kind of emotional or psychological failure on the part of the developer.
So what is it instead?
The project analysis reframes burnout as resource depletion. Think about the free lunch analogy. If a restaurant stops serving free lunch, it isn't because the chef had an emotional breakdown. It's because the ingredients ran out. The flour, the electricity, the time, the resources were depleted.
And in the FOSS world, the resource that's running out is the maintainer's personal time, their energy, and often their own money that they're using to pay for servers and things.
Exactly. And here's the key insight from the Code of Conduct T.MD. If the software had no value, the project would just fade away. No one would care. We only call it burnout when the software is still incredibly valuable to corporations.
Which means the money to support it exists somewhere.
It exists. The funds are there, inside the corporate ecosystem, but they are structurally blocked from ever reaching the developer. So burnout isn't a personal failure, it's a symptom of a systemic failure.
And that system failure is perfectly described by the tragedy of the commons. It's one of those classic economic ideas where everyone making a rational choice for themselves leads to a disaster for everyone.
It's a perfect fit. You remember the classic example, the shared pasture for farmers.
Right. Every farmer rationally adds one more cow to their herd to make a bit more profit.
Because if they don't add a cow, their competitor will, and they'll lose out. So the rational, self-interested move for every single farmer is to use the pasture as much as possible.
But when everyone does that, the combined result is that the pasture gets completely depleted and destroyed, and it becomes useless for everyone.
Now just apply that logic directly to FOSS. Every company's procurement department is rationally told to use as much free software as possible to minimize costs and maximize profit.
And if Company A decides to be a good citizen and donates, say, $1 million to a FOSS database project,
then Company B and Company C, their biggest competitors, get the exact same benefit from that improved database, but for free. They get to free ride on Company A's generosity.
So Company A's lawyers are going to ask, why on earth should we pay when our competitors don't have to?
And the incentive for everyone is to just wait for someone else to pay. It's an economic death spiral. And as the re-enemy Death Steep points out, the individual developer has absolutely no power to change that dynamic on their own.
We've seen developers try to solve this with traditional methods, like using non-commercial licenses. Let's talk about why those usually fail.
A non-commercial license seems like the obvious answer, right? Stop businesses from using it for profit unless they pay up. But the Code of Conduct T.MD explains that this creates a ton of unintended friction.
Because the whole advantage of FOSS is that it's frictionless. An
Oh.
engineer can just download it and start building.
Exactly. But the moment you add a non-commercial clause, the whole process grinds to a halt. Suddenly, legal has to get involved. Procurement needs to approve a budget before you can even start. You might need license servers to track everything.
And all that hassle just kills the advantage. The company looks at the complexity and says, you know what, forget it, we'll just use something else.
Precisely. So the adoption rate just plummets. Either the project dies from a lack of users or the maintainers still don't get paid because the barrier to entry was just too high. It's a lose-lose situation.
What about the other classic approach? Just asking for donations. We see that everywhere.
Donations are based on charity, on altruism.
Yeah.
And you can't run critical global infrastructure on altruism. It's not reliable.
And it puts the burden on the developer to become a fundraiser.
They have to go track down every big company using their software and basically beg for money. It's demeaning, it's not scalable, and it frames essential infrastructure funding as some kind of optional giveaway.
Which is exactly how corporate finance departments see it. As charity, not a core business cost.
And beyond that, the Code of Conduct T.MD points out that there's no framework for even figuring out what a reasonable donation is. If a company makes $100 million using your code, should they donate 1,000, 10,000, a million?
Since it's completely arbitrary, the rational choice for the company is still to donate zero.
So you need a structural approach. You have to force a change in the business logic itself. And that's exactly what the No Free Lunch guidelines were invented to do. They don't attack the problem with licensing law. They attack it with corporate bureaucracy and social reputation.
Okay, we know why the free riding happens, the tragedy of the commons. But let's zoom in on the mechanics of how a big company systematically avoids paying, even when its own engineers know a project is critical. It all starts with something the analysis calls frictionless adoption.
Right. The process described in the project notes is almost clinical. An engineer finds some amazing FOSS library. The license doesn't have any payment requirements, so the legal and compliance teams look at it and say, yep, zero upfront cost, minimal risk, go for it.
It's instant green light.
It's a green light, and that's FOSS's biggest advantage. But here's the insidious part. Once it's adopted, its usage inside the company just grows and grows because there's no limiting factor, there's no invoice.
The lack of an invoice.
That's the key. The software might go from being a tiny component to being the mission-critical core of their entire product, but because no money ever changed hands, no invoice was ever generated.
And in the world of corporate accounting, if there's no invoice, it basically doesn't exist.
It is completely invisible to the finance and procurement departments. The project materials really highlight this. What doesn't generate an invoice is not budgeted for. So you can have this piece of FOSS that is catastrophically important to the business, but on the financial books, its cost is zero.
The value all flows to the corporation, while the cost is completely externalized onto the maintainer.
And this can go on for years.
So what happens when an engineer inside the company finally realizes, oh no, our entire authentication system depends on this one library, and the developer hasn't made a commit in 6 months, we need to send them some money.
They run headfirst into the wall of corporate bureaucracy. They enter what the project calls the donation maze.
The donation maze.
Big companies have really strict rules about money. There are audit requirements, anti-money laundering policies, anti-corruption rules. You can't just send a direct cash donation to some random individual developer on the internet.
From their perspective, it's a huge liability. It's an auditor's nightmare. Giving money to an anonymous person online, it gets flagged immediately.
Right. The finance department sees it as charity. It's a discretionary expense, not a necessary infrastructure cost. So the engineers know it's the foundation of their product, but finance just sees a request to wire money to a stranger.
And the request gets denied or stalled, or maybe they approve some tiny token amount that doesn't actually help.
You're right. So if cash doesn't work, the next logical step for the company is to say, okay, we'll contribute code instead. We'll assign an engineer to help out.
But the analysis shows that even corporate code contributions can be a huge problem. Sometimes they're even a net negative for the project.
It's a huge distinction. First, there's the strategic problem. If Company A fixes a critical bug, that fix immediately helps their biggest rivals, Company B and Company C, for free.
So their own lawyers might actually prohibit them from contributing if it gives away a competitive advantage.
Exactly. But even worse is when they do contribute. The contributions are often what the project calls selfish features.
Selfish features.
They're very narrow fixes or additions that solve an immediate problem for that one company, but they add a lot of complexity and maintenance debt for the main project. The maintainer, who is already overworked and unpaid, now has to test, document, and maintain this new feature forever.
A feature they never asked for, and that only benefits the one company that isn't paying them. What a terrible deal.
It's an awful deal. And this is why, ultimately, financial support is the answer. As the project materials say, money is neutral.
Cash can be used for things that benefit everyone.
Right, like better testing infrastructure, legal fees, things that help the entire ecosystem and bypass that competitive deadlock.
Okay, let's look at the final failure point. This is when a company actually tries to set up a paid support contract. The legal fees for a custom contract are often more than the support is worth, so they just use their standard procurement template.
And this is where the system becomes, frankly, lethal for the maintainer. These standard contracts are written for giants to negotiate with other giants. They are completely inappropriate for dealing with an individual person.
And they just hand this to the maintainer and say, sign this.
Yes, and it contains two clauses that are absolute deal breakers.
What are they?
The first is unlimited liability. The contract says the individual maintainer has to pay the company back for any and all damages that might arise from their code. So if a bug causes a data breach that costs the corporation millions of dollars,
The solo developer is personally on the hook for those millions. Their house, their savings, everything. It's a threat of personal bankruptcy.
it's an insane risk to ask someone to take. And a second legal term is complete IP assignment. The templates demand that the maintainer sign over all rights to their own work, sometimes directly to the company.
So they're forced to give away their own creation. The project documentation puts it very bluntly. It's not a negotiation, it's an ultimatum. You either sign this suicide note or you get no money and your contribution is rejected.
And that institutionalized exploitation is the exact structural problem the No Free Lunch project was designed to blow up.
So we've laid out this deeply flawed, almost corrupt system. Now let's get to the solution. The No Free Lunch Guidelines. How does this framework fix these problems without just, breaking FOSS?
This is where it gets really clever. The No Free Lunch project doesn't change the FOSS license at all. Instead, it layers 3 tools on top of the existing license.
What are the tools?
You have a sustainability request, you have this mirror contributor license agreement, the CCLA, which is the main defense, and then a social code of conduct. The key thing is that it's all FOSS compatible, it only targets the big free riders, and a project can adopt it at any time without having to relicense everything.
So it's changing the social contract, not the legal contract for using the software.
Exactly. It uses the corporation's own bureaucracy and obsession with reputation against them. It's a beautiful hack.
Okay, let's focus on the heart of this defense.
Yeah.
The CCLA mirror strategy, which is detailed in the contributing.md file. What is it and who has to deal with it?
The Corporate Contributor License Agreement, or CCLA, is something an organization has to sign if they want to contribute code back to the project. But, and this is the important part, it only applies if that organization is making over $1 million in annual revenue from products that use that FOSS component.
Ah, the $1 million threshold. That's smart.
It's critical. It means that individual developers, students, nonprofits, small startups, they're all completely exempt. It only targets the companies that are financially able to pay but choose not to.
It keeps things frictionless for the 99% of users who aren't the problem. But the CCLA itself, the mirror part of it, that's the real weapon here.
It is the ultimate bureaucratic judo move. The CCLA that the FOSS project makes the company sign contains the exact same aggressive, toxic clauses that those companies use to force on individual maintainers.
Wait, so it includes things like unlimited liability.
Unlimited liability, mandatory IP assignment, aggressive warranties about the code, all of it.
So the project is basically saying, you wanted our developers to sign this contract. Fine. Now your multi-billion-dollar corporation has to sign the exact same one to contribute to us. The shoe is on the other foot.
It forces the corporate legal department to look in the mirror. The principle, as it says in the contributing.md, is simple and powerful. Do not demand contractual terms from maintainers that your own legal team would refuse to accept.
It instantly changes the conversation from a charity handout to a negotiation between equals about business risk.
But of course, no big corporation is ever going to sign a contract with unlimited liability. So how do they get around it? How can they actually contribute?
There have to be an escape hatch.
There is. That's the whole point. It's an engineered friction point. They are offered an off-ramp called the authorized exemption. A company can get an exemption from signing that toxic CCLA if they negotiate a separate, fair maintenance support agreement with the project maintainer.
So it forces them back to the negotiating table, but this time the power dynamic is completely different.
The playing field is finally level. The mirror CCLA is the deterrent, the threat of mutually assured destruction that forces the company to negotiate a real contract. One with reasonable liability caps, mutual respect for IP, and most importantly, actual payment for maintenance. It forces them to treat the maintainer like a real business partner, not just a resource to be exploited.
It really is a genius hack of the corporate system. So how does this get enforced in the day-to-day workflow of a developer?
That's where the pull request template.md file comes in. This file is set up so that when a corporate engineer tries to submit a contribution, a pull request, these rules are staring them right in the face. The template includes a checklist.
And what's on the checklist?
It forces the engineer, as a representative of their company, to officially declare their status. They have to check one of the boxes. Either I am an individual, or my organization is exempt under the $1 million threshold, or my organization has signed the CCLA and accepted the terms, or the crucial one, my organization has an authorized exemption through a maintenance support agreement.
So it puts the legal and financial compliance burden right into the technical workflow. You can't ignore it.
It makes compliance visible and tracked. There's no more plausible deniability. The excuse of, oh, we didn't know, is gone forever.
So the CCLA mirror is the stick. It's what forces the legal negotiation. But the other half of this strategy is all about the power of reputation and social pressure. Let's talk about the sustainability.md file. How does that change the corporate mindset?
It's all about framing. The sustainability.md file is a formal request for ongoing financial support from those big companies over the $1 million threshold. But the language it uses is very, very specific.
It avoids words like charity or donation.
Completely. It reframes the request as basic risk management and a normal cost of doing business. The document basically says, look, if this project is mission critical for your company, then funding its maintenance is no different from paying your AWS bill or buying insurance.
You're funding the stability of your own supply chain. If you don't, you're just accepting a huge unmanaged risk.
Precisely. It shifts the burden. It's no longer the maintainer begging for help. It's the corporation being reminded to manage its own liability.
And the placement of this file is strategic, too.
Yes, the RAD-MD says it should be placed right after the license notice in the main project directory. So when a company's legal team goes to review the terms, they can't see the license without also seeing this explicit request for sustainability support. It reframes the entire relationship right from the very first look.
Okay, now let's move on to the Code of Conduct 2DMD. This isn't just about one project. It's an attempt to set new norms for the entire FOSS ecosystem. It's trying to make free riding socially unacceptable everywhere. What are the new behaviors it's calling for?
The Code of Conduct T.MD lays out some clear expectations. First, and this is a big one, people representing companies are expected to treat maintainers as equal business partners.
Not as invisible, disposable resources. That's a huge mental shift.
It is. Second, it promotes the idea that if you're making huge profits from FOSS, you have a responsibility to make a commensurate contribution back to that shared infrastructure. It's about proportionality.
And the third point gets back to that tragedy of the commons idea, where everyone waits for someone else to act.
Yes. The Code of Conduct says that organizations should voluntarily and actively offer to contribute. They shouldn't wait for the developers to come to them, hat in hand. This proactive mindset is the only way to break that deadlock.
So you have this code of conduct that defines good behavior, but it's not legally binding. If some massive company just ignores it and keeps free riding, what's the enforcement mechanism?
The mechanism is public scrutiny. It's what's often called a name and shame strategy. The Code of Conduct is designed to make free riding visible. If a person in the community works for a company that is known to be a huge free rider, that person can be seen as not living up to the spirit of the guidelines.
So the penalty isn't that you get locked out of the software. It's that you lose social standing and influence within the community.
Exactly. The goal is to create social pressure and a potential PR crisis for the company. The Code of Conduct.md also requires the project itself to be transparent in its operations so the public can see who is contributing and who isn't and judge for themselves.
But let's be realistic. Does name and shame actually work on giant, profit-driven companies? Why would they comply with non-binding rules when they can save millions by ignoring them?
This is the core economic insight of the whole project, and the answer is surprisingly simple. Eventually, the cost of continuing to free ride becomes greater than the cost of contributing.
So compliance isn't about being nice. It's about loss aversion.
It's pure economic self-interest. There are very tangible costs to getting a bad reputation in the tech community.
Like what?
First and foremost, hiring and retention. The best engineers do not want to work for companies that are known for exploiting the open source community. Being publicly shamed as a free rider makes it incredibly difficult to attract top talent.
And second,
Investor perception. More and more big investors are looking at ESG metrics, environmental, social, and governance. Exploiting FOSS maintainers is a clear social governance risk, and it can make a company look like a bad investment.
so contributing to FOSS is no longer an optional expense. It becomes a necessary insurance premium against major business risks.
That's the perfect way to put it. The contribution you make buys you a positive reputation, which directly lowers your hiring costs and makes you more attractive to investors. The No Free Lunch Project creates a world where supporting your dependencies is the most rational, profitable choice you can make.
This is a really comprehensive framework for fixing the sustainability problem, but it does raise a big question. Does imposing all of this, the CCLA mirror, the social pressure, does it end up undermining the best parts of FOSS? The freedom, the low friction, the gift culture.
That is the #1 concern, and the guidelines were designed very carefully to avoid that. The short answer is no, it doesn't, because it keeps the legal layer and the social layer completely separate.
Okay, so let's look at the legal layer first. The project doesn't get relicensed, right?
Not at all. As the materials make very clear, the software stays under a true FOSS license, like MIT or Apache. The guidelines are not legally binding on use. The license still guarantees your technical freedom to use, modify, and distribute the code, whether you pay or not.
So a company could, in theory, read the code of conduct, see the sustainability request, ignore it all, and just keep using the software legally.
They absolutely could. That legal freedom is protected. But what the guidelines change is how the community perceives those actions. You have the legal right to use the code, but you give up the social right to demand help, attention, or goodwill from the maintainers.
The license gives you the code, but it doesn't give you a right to the maintainer's time.
Exactly. The license gives you the right to their code, not the right to their attention or approval.
Which brings us to a really powerful argument in the project materials, which is that the current free-for-all is the real threat to FOSS freedom.
It is. The real crisis threatening FOSS is the exploitation of unpaid labor. This unspoken expectation that maintainers will just donate their personal time to serve billion-dollar companies for free is the hidden cancer in the system.
Because when maintainers burn out and abandon projects, the freedom to use the software becomes meaningless. It's the freedom to use a dead, unmaintained, insecure piece of code.
The No Free Lunch Project is trying to protect the freedom to rely on maintained, sustainable projects. By forcing companies to pay for the maintenance they depend on, it ensures the infrastructure survives, which is what protects the practical freedom of the whole ecosystem.
And what about that low friction advantage? Does the $1 million threshold really preserve the ease of adoption?
It does, and that design is very intentional. The vast, vast majority of users, individuals, academics, small startups, they never come close to that revenue threshold, so they are completely unaffected. They can download the code, start using it, no CCLA, no support agreement. That easy-to-try, easy-to-adopt benefit is fully preserved for them.
So the friction, the CCLA mirror, it only kicks in when a company becomes so successful using the software that their free riding starts to become a systemic problem.
It applies the friction exactly where the problem is. If you're profitable enough to cross that $1 million line, you're profitable enough to pay for your own infrastructure risk.
Finally, one of the most powerful parts of this whole strategy is that it's license agnostic and can be introduced at any time. What does that mean for a big company that's been free riding on a project for a decade?
It means the safe harbor is gone. It's over. Because these guidelines operate on the social and governance level, not the legal license level, a maintainer can decide to adopt them tomorrow for a project that's been around for 10 years. There's no grandfather clause for free riding.
So a company that has strategically ignored a critical dependency for years could suddenly wake up one morning and find that they are now subject to these rules and at immediate reputational risk.
Yes. They are instantly exposed to the mirror CCLA and the whole name and shame mechanism. And what this does is force smart companies to change their strategy. They can't afford to wait until they get publicly called out.
They have to start treating FOSS support as a standard, proactive part of their risk management right from the beginning.
Exactly. The scheme creates this constant forward pressure towards sustainability, using nothing more than transparency and pure economic self-interest.
So, we have just completed a deep dive into the structural fragility of the FOSS ecosystem. I think we've confirmed that FOSS maintenance is a finite resource, and it's currently being exploited by corporate free riding in a way that is not just ethically wrong, but structurally unsustainable.
The whole goal of the No Free Lunch Project is to fix a fundamentally broken business model. And it does that by using a corporation's own self-interest and bureaucracy against itself. The Mirror CCLA and the social norms force this really critical mental shift.
The shift from seeing FOSS maintenance as optional charity to seeing it as necessary operational expense and risk management.
By forcing companies to treat maintainers as equal business partners, not just invisible volunteers, these guidelines are trying to build a new, sustainable social contract for our entire digital world.
It's a powerful idea.
I want to leave you with one final provocative thought that's really emphasized in the project materials. In this whole crisis, the main victims aren't actually the developers. Maintainers, they have day jobs. If their FOSS project collapses, they just move on. Their crisis genuinely becomes not my problem.
The real victims are the businesses.
The businesses, maybe your own, that are built on top of this fragile, unmaintained foundation. So if your product relies on FOSS, you have to ask yourself, are you truly prepared for the day that the exhausted maintainer finally decides that your corporate crisis is simply not my problem? And what is the real cost of not being prepared for that day?
Looking into that CCLA mirror can be a startling reflection, but maybe a necessary one. Understanding that cost is the first step toward building something that actually lasts. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.
Thank you.